So I'm out again with my reground Magnum Kukri machete from cold steel, and you can see now the very wide primary bevel extends up the full length of the machete. And I have a Japanese camp axe from Japan Woodworker. The Japanese camp axe has a very heavy bit profile. It's much too heavy for local woods in terms of general chopping. The only wood that it would be suitable for is very fresh clear white pine, and anything harder than that, the bit is just too thick. So I have a nice variety of wood to cut. I have a tree here with very blasty branches which are all dead and extremely dry. I have some nice deadfall here which is in a semi-rotted state, much softer, that needs to be cleared up. And I have a wide variety of scrub brush, small diameter sticks, and some of this should be cleaned up here as well. So this will be a good way to have a look at the general abilities of a longer, very slight blade, in this case the Magnum Kukri machete from cold steel, and a much heavier focused impact tool as the Japanese camp axe. And some things are relatively obvious, like the Kukri machete is going to work much better on small limbs like this. A couple of things that I'm interested on is, will the much thinner new edge on the Magnum Kukri machete hold up to the much rougher work, such as on these branches? We'll have a look at them, and you can see they're relatively thick, so they're not going to be cut cleanly in easy swipes, but they're very hard, so it's going to put an awful lot of force on the edge of the machete when it tries to cleave through them. So that will be essentially the ultimate durability check in terms of woodworking, because there's nothing harder than you can do and try to cut that. And then for general utility, we'll be cleaning up some deadfall. And then for scrub clearing, we have all this low diameter wood right here. So I should be able to get a decent workout on these two blades and get some useful information, and hopefully the Japanese camp axe will shine on some of the harder cutting, such as those branches and some deadfall. I don't think it's going to excel here because that wood is just too soft. It's semi-rotted, so it's not going to really benefit as much from the power of the Japanese camp axe. I think the Magnum Kukri machete should easily be able to hold its own here. But I'm going to look for later on some deadfall that's only blown over, say, in the last, say, 6 months or so, and hopefully say black spruce, because that's a much harder wood, and the Magnum Kukri machete will not be able to cut limbs of that size. Wow, it looks kind of really large there. That was a bit deceptive. The Magnum Kukri machete will not be able to cut limbs of this size on black spruce with clean strokes when it's newly fallen. So the camp axe should be a better tool for that. So I'm trying to find a sort of niche for the camp axe where that thicker bit will become more productive, and I'm hoping that's the kind of wood. And in fact, way back there, that looks to be what I'm looking for. That tree there doesn't look to be falling down as long. It may be harder. I'll have a look at that. Hopefully that's what I want, to find something which is more suitable for the Japanese camp axe. But I'll scout around until I find something anyway. So now it's off to do some work. So I got the trees cleaned up, and I cut down a few of the slight alders, and I also took this, which is some of the more rotted wood, and I put that right there in the corner by the wood that I cleaned up. And what I'll do now before I leave is I'll take some boughs, green boughs, cover that over, and then even in a heavy snowfall that should be protected. So if I'm up around in this area and I do want to make a nice little fire some evening, simply take the boughs off. I got that sort of nice, very punky, rotty wood there. I should be able to break that apart. And then I got this wood right next to it to sort of start my fire. A couple of comments. The Japanese camp axe right there, Magnum Kukri machete. On the larger branches, the Japanese camp axe was really showing its merit. All, of course, the cutting energy is focused right behind a very bit, but the Magnum Kukri machete wasn't outperformed on this type of wood. It held its own. And on the alders, the smaller wood, the Magnum Kukri machete was much more functional, able to cut through that much easier. And I also checked out my grind modification. So I put a very deep primary grind on this, and I've made it variable. So right here in the main sweet spot in the middle, it's around 20 thousandths thick behind the edge. Right down here, it goes down to around 10 thousandths thick. And up by the very tip, it goes from 15 to 10 thousandths right at the very tip. So what this means is when I'm cutting very light vegetation, like a small sapling like that one right there, or any of the scrub that you can see behind it, I use the tip of the Magnum Kukri machete, and it goes through that very easy because the edge in the very tip is only 10 thousandths. And as the wood gets harder, I go back further back along the edge, and the edge keeps thickening till in the main sweep, which is what I use to take off the dead hard branches like this, is around 20 thou thick. So now a couple of comments comparing the two of them, and I'll show you two relatively different trees. You can see these two trees here. The branches are very tight together. At times there's only maybe 4 or 5 inches in between them. This one and this one, the one in behind it, right there. They're very difficult to limb out with the axe, because what tends to happen, say you want to cut off this branch, so you're coming down here. After you cut off, so say you want to cut off this branch, you're coming down to about right here. After you cut off this branch, the axe is going to be about right here, and you're risking having the haft of it smack off this other branch. The problem with using the axe, so with these trees, the problem with using the axe is it's very difficult to cut off the branches without either getting the haft of the axe underneath the head, trapped in among the branches, or either taking impacts off the haft directly, which you don't want because it's only wood and it's not meant to take that. So for trees that are very heavy in growth like that, the Magnum Kukri machete is really nice because it has the ability to work on multiple branches, and you can sort of sweep down and clear all these off. Now in comparison, if you look at this tree here, it only has a few, I'll zoom in, relatively heavy branches. So on a tree like this, you can easily pick off all these branches piece by piece, and the Japanese camp axe works very well. And back there in the distance, right here, you can see the branches are much heavier and are fairly far apart. That was an extreme close-up. Those branches are at least 8 to 10 inches apart. So the Japanese camp axe got a lot of room to work, and you can bring all its power to bear on those heavier branches. So what I'm finding is, depending on the species of the tree, the Magnum Kukri machete works exceptionally well when the branches are a ½ inch and under and really tight together. Once you go over about an inch, the Japanese camp axe and the additional power, you can sort of start to feel. Once you get up around 2 inches on the branches and the branches start to space out a lot, the Japanese camp axe really starts to pull ahead of the Magnum Kukri machete. And similarly, when you're bucking thicker wood, like if I had wanted to cut these two pieces of wood in half, I'd much prefer the Japanese camp axe to do that over the Magnum Kukri machete. The Japanese camp axe would be more fluid, and as this wood is relatively soft, the thicker bit, you don't have to be concerned about penetration, and the thicker bit makes it much more fluid. However, the Magnum Kukri machete, as I noted, works much better for clearing up all this scrub and all this sapling and all these sort of small branches. So neither one of them is better than the other. They're two very different tools. So now I've added some more wood to my little pile, and it should be obvious a couple of them are actually root pieces. I've also cleaned up the area quite a bit, opened it up. You can see all these trees have had all their dead branches removed, so you're getting much more sun coming in here and opening this place up. And cleaned up these as well, and even some back there. Left a lot because there's a lot more knives that I want to take out, and I don't want to do everything with these two blades. And I'm satisfied with what I have done now. So, a couple more comments. The Magnum Kukri machete held up well. No rolling or damage to the primary grind. Now there was some impaction of the edge, mainly in the last, say, 3 inches of the tip. That's not really due to the steel, as much as the fact is, as noted, some of these are roots. And when you're cutting wood like this, sometimes it is basically frozen into the ground. You have to cut through the branches, and sometimes your knife will end up going into the ground. So that's going to happen to the tip. There's nothing you can do about it. So the good thing is now, and I'll just come right in really close, you can see how very, very minute the actual edge bevel is on this knife. And that's the only part I'm actually sharpening. Now the other thing I'm going to say is, I'm not really at full power when I'm using this Magnum Kukri machete yet. I'm only letting the blade come back to about right here, and I'm using mainly just my elbow to drive. If I want to increase the power, I'll actually let it fall all the way back like this, and I'll snap it forward and close my fingers as I'm bringing my arm down. That'll about double it. And if I really want to maximize the power, I'll bring it all the way back to flat, rotate my arm all the way back up straight, and bring it down in a great big arc while I'm also spinning it around in my hand. The only reason I haven't done that yet is I'm still not on good steel on the edge of this. I'm not on bad steel anymore, and I wouldn't call the edge retention bad, but it's definitely, I wouldn't call it good yet. So on wood like this and doing this type of work here, as long as I avoid the dirt, as soon as you hit the dirt of course it's going to go blunt. But when I'm working on the wood above ground, just clearing off these branches, cutting the saplings, that kind of stuff, I should be able to cut about, say, 100 pieces of wood that's between, say, 2 and 4 inches thick. So I should be in the range of doing about 1,000 or so chops with the Kukri machete, and the edge should still be blisteringly sharp, should still be able to cut fine grasses. It's not there yet, but it's showing steady improvement every time that I use it. It's getting easier to sharpen, the edge is forming cleaner, it's responding better to higher grits, and it's retaining that high level of sharpness much nicer. And I'm now where I can do like a few hundred chops, and it still has that really nice edge that will easily cut through fine vegetation. And again, as long as I avoid, you know, dirty wood cutting through roots and that kind of foolishness, which you have to do from time to time. So when I get the edge up, and after a few more sharpenings, I'll slowly start increasing the force that I'm using. But again, I don't want to use a lot of force at this stage and then have the primary grind bend and not know that the primary grind bend because the steel is still soft and damaged from when it was overheated when cold steel initially ground it, or did it bend because I don't have the edge thick enough. So again, I want to get it to where it has really good steel before I start doing that harder work. But so far, again, I'm very pleased with the way that it's handling. Significant improvement now that it has this primary grind on it, running the full edge right from the tip all the way down to the base. Now when it cuts into the wood, it gets a much smoother cut, and you don't get that big rush of force with the very heavy edge it had initially. Now you get a much smoother force as the force sort of is diluted, if you will, because of this primary grind, which makes it a much smoother cut. So essentially you don't get as much vibration or as much shock. It's cutting much smoother, so everything has improved. I mean, the handle ergonomics and security have even gone up because it just feels much nicer in hand. And of course this will sharpen much faster now because my edge is so absolutely tiny. And again, I've noticed an improvement on cutting ability, able to cut through this lighter brush much better, especially out through the tip, because the tip now is just under 10,000ths of an inch thick right through the tip itself. And the other thing that was nice to see is I found now a nice use for this Japanese camp axe, even though, as I've noted, it has a relatively hefty bit grind. It works well on cutting up this softer wood, cutting up old stumps like this, wind-blown trees. There's another couple right there. These are all soft wood, so the heavy bit goes into them really well, doesn't bind, and it has lots of power for cutting through these heavier branches, and works well when they're nice and spaced far apart. The only thing that concerns me is, see where they left this wedge up above the top of the handle? They did that intentionally. This wedge actually tapers, it's not flat. So essentially, once the handle stabilizes, I'm going to cut this off, because right now there's a concern that when I'm using this, as it's cutting through the wood, I could take impacts right here. And if I get hard impacts right here, I could end up splitting this handle, and that'll be an awful waste to have that destroyed for that. The only other thing that I don't like about this still now is that the handle is still fairly slick. I've been putting linseed oil on it, but the handle was bone dry when I got it, so it's absorbing linseed oil fairly rapidly. I got about four coats on now, and it's getting to where it's decent, but still not nice. Like when I use my Grand First Brox axe, that has an almost tacky feel. Now, it's not really tacky like varnish, but it's not slippery. Like, this is really slippery. There's no traction at all. My Brox axe, over the years, I've had it now for several years, it has a really nice linseed oil coat on it, so it's nice in hand, and you can even use it a bit when it's wet. This would be useless when it's wet. It's too slippery. But I'll keep putting coats of linseed oil on that, and it should improve. But as for right now, this nice little pile of wood here, and all the limbing that I've done, cutting up some alders, really nice to have these two blades out. Nice to see that the primary grind is working on the Magnum Kukri machete exactly as intended, and it's nice to see an application for where the Japanese camp axe is actually starting to pick out a name for itself. So I think I'm going to not regrind a Japanese camp axe. I'm going to leave it as it is, and I'm going to use it more for the axe that I would have in the winter when the wood is frozen and hard, where I want that extra strength at the edge. And I'm also going to use it for when I'm harvesting deadfall like this, which tends to be kind of soft, so the thicker bit profile will make it more fluid. And I'm also going to be using it for the harder work, like cutting these roots, cutting off the branches that are buried into the ground, because again, the heavier edge profile will minimize the damage when it slams into the ground and anything that it actually hits while it is there. So it's proving to be effective for that, because I really wouldn't want to use my Grand First Brox axe for this type of work. The wood is too dirty. I'm having to cut into the ground, and I have the edge of my Brox axe refined essentially for clean woods. It's very, very thin. The final apex angle on my Grand First Brox axe is probably only about 10 to 12 degrees per side, and immediately sweeps back to about 6 to 8 degrees per side. Works exceptionally well cutting. That's the walleye hatchet. Works exceptionally well cutting all these types of woods, doing this delimbing, but I wouldn't want to use it on very frozen hard knots and sort of groundwork like this, because the edge doesn't have the necessary thickness for it. So Japanese camp axe is proving to be variable there. And this is the type of wood that I said the Japanese camp axe would excel at. This is an exceptionally soft piece of wood, and the Japanese camp axe would chew through this relatively easily. I mean, it'll easily bury itself to the, you'd easily get about 2 inches of penetration into this wood, because that's very soft. So that type of wood is cut. So relatively nice time.